The battle over the nomination of the next Supreme Court Justice, Amy Coney Barrett, is underway. What's the significance of this nomination in terms of history, and where do we go from here? We'll talk about it with Ilya Shapiro of the Cato Institute, author of a brand new book, Supreme Disorder, right here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger, which starts right now.
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming back with you with the Washington Examiner, of course, as our partners here on this show. So good to be with you amidst a nomination confirmation process for the United States Supreme Court that is no less fascinating than has, well, this process become, and kind of crazy and topsy-turvy, to be sure. By the way, before we get going, if you have not done so already, strongly encourage you to please subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Follow me on social media, and of course, check out our partners at the Washington Examiner at washingtonexaminer.com. So, over the weekend, President Donald Trump nominated Judge Amy Coney Barrett of the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to replace Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away a couple of Fridays ago. And now, of course, the Republicans are working hard to approve this nomination to confirm her through the United States Senate, ideally by Election Day. What are we to make of Judge Barrett and her record and what she could bring to the Supreme Court, and also the judicial nominating process as it has developed over time and as we've come to know it for the past 30 or 40 years especially? Let's talk about these topics here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with Ilya Shapiro, who is director of the Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute and author of a brand new book. Let's put it up on the screen, Mr. Matoush, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations, and the Politics of America's Highest Court. Its author, Ilya Shapiro, rejoins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Ilya, sir, welcome back.
Good to be back with you, Jimmy.
Congratulations on the book. You released it last week, and your foresight in knowing that your book would come out just as this nomination process was going to get underway is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, we were timing it to be ahead of the election, but this little extra, the publisher had to pay more.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. So it is fascinating where we're at. I've got some video from the nomination announcement on Saturday with President Trump and Judge Amy Coney Barrett, and of course some other footage that we'll be showcasing. But I want to start things off right from the top. You have this new book, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court. What inspired you to write this book, and what is unique about it?
I've long been wanting to write a book about the Supreme Court, and in the wake of the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings debacle 2 years ago, I thought, how did we get here? I was a court watcher. I've been a court watcher for over a decade. I obviously know about Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas and all that, but what was it like earlier? And why does it seem so much worse now? And can anything be done about it? And so I look back all the way to starting from the very beginning with George Washington, who, by the way, had a nominee rejected himself. So politics has been into a part of it from the very beginning. And then went all the way through the modern age. And as the judicial philosophies have congealed and changed, and really what's different now isn't that politics is part of both the pre-selection and then during the confirmation debates, but that we have divergent interpretive theories that at a time when the Supreme Court is really powerful because the federal government is really powerful, map onto partisan preferences at a time when the parties are more ideologically sorted than they've been since at least the Civil War. So, of course, these fights are going to happen.
Yeah, in 2018, we saw what happened with now Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and that was, I think, the most disconcerting example of the politicization of the court process in terms of particularly being on television and all the hearings and what happened with the allegations against him and so forth. And it became really a spectacle that enveloped the country in a way that we hadn't quite seen before, I think in part because of the aspect of social media as well. How do you think the dynamics of the way that our 24/7 media environment with social media and so forth has influenced the process today?
Well, certainly that instantaneous reach of communications is able to inflame tensions more than they would otherwise be inflamed. We've had very controversial nominations in the past. In fact, when people ask me what I think the most controversial one, asking me to expecting me to pick between Kavanaugh and Thomas and Bork, I actually go all the way back to 1916 with Louis Brandeis. This was a presidential election year vacancy. He picked the first, Woodrow Wilson picked the first Jewish nominee who was also a social crusader in that progressive time. Very controversial. It took 5 months, the longest of anyone. We had our first ever hearings. Hearings didn't start with George Washington. Hearings started in 1916, although it was thought unseemly for the nominee himself to testify, so he didn't do that, but ultimately confirmed. Right after Brandeis was confirmed, a different justice, Charles Evans Hughes, resigned to run against Woodrow Wilson in the presidential election. So, we think about, 2016 or Kavanaugh 2018 as just being unprecedented. There's very little new under the sun, although social media, I think, in general, does not help things.
Again, Ilya Shapiro, our guest. So let's talk about one aspect that I think has really helped to make the Supreme Court nominating process and any federal judicial post very significant, and that comes to the role of the judiciary and how it's evolved over time. I mean, I wrote this, and it echoes some of the sentiments I know you have in your new book, Supreme Disorder, and what others have observed. But in a column I wrote last week, I said that the big problem for Democrats is not that Trump is president and can fill a vacancy. Democrats have grown government so much and relied on the courts for so long that they are fearful. Win or lose in November, a constitutionalist court is a lasting impediment to their long-running expansion of power. That's why if Democrats were in Republicans' position, they would certainly move apace. And I think this is significant because since the Supreme Court has become so involved in political matters and helping to even at times allow for the growth of government to continue unabated, I would say in many cases in violation of the Constitution, that has upped the ante, made it so much more important for the Supreme Court when these political positions or these nomination opportunities come up for a president.
Yeah, I think you were paraphrasing a part of my chapter 19, Jimmy. So those were some good thoughts there. You're right. Part of the reason why these battles exist is because the power has been contra constitutional requirements been centralized in Washington, and within Washington, rather than Congress even resolving these debates, these political clashes or differences in cultural views, what have you, it's shifted into the administrative state, into the executive branch. We have governance even before the pen and the phone and the tweet. We had the regulation, and there's many more regulations than there are laws, and the bureaucrats can't be unelected; they can only be sued. So these different interpretive theories really matter, and that's why you have these sorts of fights. But you're absolutely right. The reason why people in other countries can't really name their justices the way that we do here is because what their courts decide aren't necessarily the biggest political issues. They're more technical legal ones.
Once again, we're talking with Ilya Shapiro, author of the new book, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Before we get to Judge Amy Coney Barrett's nomination and some of the different aspects of her judicial history and what we can expect in this process, I want to ask you about the life and legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the late justice, particularly the legacy on the court and what she brought to the bench since being appointed in 1993 by then President Bill Clinton.
Well, she was, as many people have called her, she was, even before joining the court, the Thurgood Marshall of the women's movement. That is, achieving and pushing back on so many of the sex stereotypes and gender discriminatory parts of society that had become codified in law. And often being very strategic, having men as clients, challenging some of these things. And so even before she became a judge, she was already a well-known heroine and pioneer, and became even more so on the court, but became kind of a reliable vote, a reliable voice on the progressive side of the court on issues of not just gender, but race and religion, government power, seeing the federal government as a force for justice in the world. Her probably most famous majority opinion is Virginia versus United States, requiring the Virginia State School Military Institute to admit female cadets. Although in the last 10 or so years, especially after Justice Stevens retired and she became the liberal leader, she's been issuing these fierce dissents, and that's where she became the notorious RBG and kind of this pop figure on the left, where little girls would dress up as her for Halloween, that sort of thing. That's really come in the last 10 years in cases over voting rights and campaign finance, employment discrimination, the travel ban, you name it. Those biggest controversies, whether on the bottom side of a 5-4 or a 7-2, she was there.
Yeah, it really is striking when you consider what she brought to the table when she was nominated, and then also in terms of eventually becoming that liberal leader.
Jimmy, it's one of the ironies of history that when President Clinton was nominating her, a lot of progressive activist groups, especially involved in the abortion debate, were nervous because 6 months earlier she had given a speech saying that the court really overreached in Roe v. Wade and had done it the wrong way at the wrong time. Now, as we know now, that seems kind of ridiculous and amazing that they had that concern, but she was making a very good lawyer's point that the Supreme Court inserted itself into a political controversy, made things worse, and didn't use the right legal tools. She would have used equal protection and women rather than the right to privacy, that sort of thing. But interesting little wrinkle in history.
Now, it is the president's prerogative under the Constitution to nominate a new justice, and then the Senate has the opportunity to confirm with their advice and consent process. And on Saturday, President Trump formally nominated the Seventh Circuit Judge Amy Coney Barrett, and here is a tidbit from his announcement on Saturday.
Over the past week, our nation has mourned the loss of a true American legend. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a legal giant and a pioneer for women. Her extraordinary life and legacy will inspire Americans for generations to come. Now we gather in the Rose Garden to continue our never-ending task of ensuring equal justice and preserving the impartial rule of law. Today it is my honor to nominate one of our nation's most brilliant and gifted legal minds to the Supreme Court. She is a woman of unparalleled achievement, towering intellect, sterling credentials, and unyielding loyalty to the Constitution, Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
So in just a moment, we'll get to some of the jurisprudential discussions here. But overall, I mean, now the table has been set. The nomination has been presented by the President of the United States of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. What can we expect going back to the theatrics and so forth from this nomination process with her this go around, especially because it could be a notable shift in the court with a conservative or more originalist justice replacing a noted liberal justice in Ginsburg?
Well, in terms of the process, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says that she will get a vote. He left himself some wiggle room, maybe not necessarily before the election, although I imagine that's his target. And Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham has set the beginning of her hearings for October 12th, which is Columbus Day. There'll be 4 days of hearings, the standard thing in modern times. That does give us just enough time to go through the full process. I think we're now 5 weeks from Election Day, or at least we will be tomorrow. Just enough time in theory, and it can be done. There'll be an interesting moment where Kamala Harris, the vice presidential nominee for Joe Biden, is on the Judiciary Committee and will be asking questions of Judge Barrett. That could affect the course of the confirmation process. It could affect the election. And at the end of the day, it looks like the Republicans have the votes, whether they push the vote for before the election or leave it open to entice voters to come out and secure that for the president. I'm sure that's going to be discussed as a matter of political gamesmanship. And so it looks much more likely than not that she'll be confirmed, which is in line with historical precedent. That is 29. Now, this is the 30th time there's been a vacancy in a presidential election year. The president has always made a nomination. And all but 2 times when it's united government, there's been a confirmation. And all but once when it's divided government, that nominee has not been confirmed. That was the Merrick Garland situation 4 years ago. Assuming Judge Barrett joins the court, that means that John Roberts is no longer the median vote. At that point, probably Brett Kavanaugh becomes the median vote. That's a more conservative, a more originalist court. And so on issues ranging from racial preferences in higher education to Second Amendment rights, to abortion regulation, not overturning Roe v. Wade. Those adamant pro-lifers or pro-choicers who think that Roe v. Wade is in the balance are just overstating things. But at the margins, certain regulations that would otherwise have been struck down will now be upheld. But basically, any issue that you think of as a 5-4 issue now becomes a 6-3 one. Now John Roberts becomes the potential 6th vote. Not the 5th one, and that's certainly significant.
What did you mean by median vote? I've seen your writing about this, median vote for Justice Kavanaugh.
It's different than a swing vote. A swing vote is someone who really can go either way on any given issue that's unpredictable. Justice Kennedy hated to be called a swing vote, but essentially was. Roberts, I don't think, has ever been a swing vote. He's strategic and he's canny, but he's definitely conservative. I mean, so that's why I call him the median. He is in the middle on average of the various cases, the deciding vote, if you will.
Again, Ilya Shapiro, director of the Center for Constitutional Studies at the Cato Institute, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. One other thing, just in terms of the dynamics of this, we're in the middle of an election year, meaning there are a lot of senators who will be in those seats for the confirmation hearings come October 12th, who may be wanting to be focused on campaigning as opposed to being in Washington, D.C., especially Democrats who would rather make hay out of this and so forth. And then again, it does get those folks who are in the committee on television in a way that other senators who are not on the committee will not be on television. But I think that maybe this coronavirus pandemic, where a lot of campaigning is being done remotely via Zoom, may at least provide a little bit of practical wiggle room for some of these candidates who are trying to both campaign and do their senatorial duties at the same time, Ilya.
Yeah, I would have thought, apparently we're past this, but the Democrats threatened to boycott the hearings altogether. And if they're going to run on a process argument, that is, this close to an election, there should be no confirmation. The president sure can make a nomination, but we shouldn't rush this through. And they're hypocrites based on what they did 4 years ago, which is a fair political argument that they can make. But that might be more effective if they boycotted the hearing, took no part in the process, rather than kind of issuing the same standard attacks that they make against every Republican nominee, whether it be about abortion or Obamacare or climate change or workers' rights, all these different issues, because those sorts of things are not going to convince Republican Senate votes, and I don't think they're going to convince the swing voters that Democrats need in those pivotal Midwestern states or Arizona or what have you that they're trying to win, either in the Senate or for Joe Biden. Now, I'm a simple constitutional lawyer. I'm not a political operative, and clearly the ship seems to have sailed because Chuck Schumer has started laying out these same parade of horribles, and senators have said they're going to participate in the committee hearings. So we're going to have basically a very standard process just in the ugly teeth of the election.
Now let's shift gears here to focus in on Judge Amy Coney Barrett, the nominee. What do we know about her from a background standpoint, Ilya Shapiro?
She's got a long track record of thoughtful and serious academic writings as well. She's spent 20 years as a professor at Notre Dame Law School, as well as 3 years on the bench in the Seventh Circuit, which, by the way, is more time than John Roberts spent on the circuit court. Only 1 year less than Scalia. A lot of the judges who get promoted from the lower courts don't spend that much time along the way. She's written, she's famous for a dissent that she wrote in a Second Amendment case, very historical, looking at felon deprivation of the right, nonviolent felon deprivation of the right to keep and bear arms, in a couple of abortion cases, looking at what Roe v. Wade requires or Planned Parenthood versus Casey requires. But in general, very much like Scalia, the justice for whom she clerked, sticks to history and tradition rather than making up the law as she goes along. Maybe a little more willing to overturn precedents. So on the question of stare decisis, maybe more in between Scalia and Thomas, but can be expected to be on the right side of the court. Where exactly we'd have to see, but has been a thoughtful scholar, and her dedication to textualism, originalism comes through. Maybe a little too much beholden to the rational basis test to get into the weeds in terms of not questioning the reasons for certain kinds of economic regulations. But some of this will just have to be fleshed out in the cases that come before her. I think she'll, in the end, be somewhere right there where Scalia would have been.
Again, Ilya Shapiro, our guest, author of the new book. Let's put it up on the screen again, Mr. Matus, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court. Now let's get into some of the philosophy a little more from the perspective of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Here is President Trump in cut 3 when he officially nominated Judge Barrett. Here's what he said in terms of her judicial philosophy, that is how she would look at interpreting the law.
Amy Coney Barrett will decide cases based on the text of the Constitution as written. As Amy has said, being a judge takes courage. You are not there to decide cases as you may prefer. You are there to do your duty and to follow the law wherever it may take you. That is exactly what Judge Barrett will do on the U.S. Supreme Court. Law and order is the foundation of the American system of justice. No matter the issue, no matter the case before her, I am supremely confident that Judge Barrett will issue rulings based solely upon a fair reading of the law. She will defend the sacred principle of equal justice for citizens of every race, color, religion, and creed. Congratulations again to Judge Barrett. I know that you will make our country very, very proud.
And one other clip I want to show before we dive in here, Ilya Shapiro, is of Amy Coney Barrett in cut 5 talking about, comparing herself to the judicial philosophy of the late Justice Antonin Scalia, for whom she was once a clerk.
I was lucky enough to clerk for Justice Scalia, and given his incalculable influence on my life, I am very moved to have members of the Scalia family here today, including his dear wife, Maureen. I clerked for Justice Scalia more than 20 years ago, but the lessons I learned still resonate. His judicial philosophy is mine too, A judge must apply the law as written. Judges are not policymakers, and they must be resolute in setting aside any policy views they might hold.
Your reactions, Ilya Shapiro?
Yeah, this is why I said that she's going to be very much like Justice Scalia. Bit of an updating 20 years later in terms of, there's been a lot of academic scholarship on how to determine the original public meaning and how to be a faithful judge and what the text means and how you apply different canons of construction and things like that. But I think she's going to be Scalia, although maybe without the sharp elbows. I mean, you saw the grace, the poise there. She could very well be not just an intellectual leader, but to be able to persuade some of her colleagues with the force of her character.
Yeah, and something else that was so interesting that she made a point of highlighting, let's play cut 4 in that Rose Garden address. She highlighted the friendship between the late Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Antonin Scalia and the lesson that she takes away from it.
Particularly poignant to me was her long and deep friendship with Justice Antonin Scalia, my own mentor. Justices Scalia and Ginsburg disagreed fiercely in print without rancor in person. Their ability to maintain a warm and rich friendship, despite their differences, even inspired an opera. These two great Americans demonstrated that arguments, even about matters of great consequence, need not destroy affection. In both my personal and professional relationships, I strive to meet that standard.
I found that to be a very striking point that she decided to raise, because it wasn't like she spoke for 20 minutes. It was less than 10 minutes that she addressed the American people. But in that speech, she made a point of saying, look, we can still come together despite political divides. Scalia and Ginsburg were both examples of that.
Absolutely. This is one of the great stories that has come out since Justice Ginsburg's passing. They would take trips together, their famous opera friendships, the way that they could set aside their professional differences. I mean, in a country that's so rife with division and polarization, where people break up families over political differences, this is heartwarming. I hope it's not too much of a throwback that we can never reconsider. But I mean, if you're living in a neighborhood where there's signs, yard signs for different politicians, and part of the problem is there are fewer people living in those kinds of neighborhoods. We've sort of sorted ourselves geographically by political views. But anyway, if you do see someone that has other views, go over and have a beer or watch the game or whatever makes sense, because there's much more to life than political or professional differences.
I want to read a quick line from your submission to a CNN article combining a number of different legal scholars' reactions to the selection of Amy Coney Barrett, Judge Barrett, as the nominee from President Trump for this post. You said that we can expect a Supreme Court jurisprudence that, like it or not, will be more principled. What do you mean by that, Ilya Shapiro?
Well, it goes back to that point about the Roberts court and John Roberts being the median vote. I think in a lot of cases these last 2 years where after Kennedy's retirement, Roberts became that middle seat jurisprudentially, where decisions that he's taken have been taken not because of his theory of the law, but of his view of how best to position the court for perceptions of legitimacy and other things, other considerations that are not legal. And so I think with Barrett joining the court, that's another voice that's very principled. I don't think we're going to see too many cases, too many decisions that can be dismissed as strategery.
Yeah, I think that's well put. Just a few minutes left with our guest, Ilya Shapiro, author of Supreme Disorder. Let's go ahead and play cut 7. This is Joe Biden reacting to the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
It doesn't matter what the American people want. President Trump sees a chance to fulfill his explicit mission, steal away the vital protections of the ACA from countless families. The American people understand the urgency of this moment. They understand that if Donald Trump gets his way, They could lose their right to vote, their right to clean air and water, their right to equal pay for equal work. Workers could lose their collective bargaining rights. Dreamers could be thrown out of the only country they've ever known. And women could lose the bedrock rights enshrined in Roe v. Wade for 50 years. The Senate has to stand strong for our democracy. They must not act on this nomination until the American people finish the process they're already begun of selecting their president.
So that's a little bit of Joe Biden talking about how disastrous things could be if Judge Amy Coney Barrett gets gets approved. Of course, he does want to make that nomination himself, would like to fill it if he is elected president of the United States. But one thing I noticed there is that Biden is focusing on very much the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, as a big plank for his campaign, and other Democrats are doing the same thing in terms of their, what I would say, scaremongering about Judge Barrett and what she might bring as a sixth conservative justice on the court. What do you make of what Biden said there, but especially the Obamacare component here? Because I tend to agree with an editorial in the Wall Street Journal this week, which says that it's very unlikely that Obamacare is simply going to be thrown out by the court, even with Judge Barrett as Justice Barrett.
Yeah, that speech by Biden reminded me of Ted Kennedy's Robert Bork's America speech that he gave 45 minutes after Bork was nominated in July 1987. This whole calumny of horribles that would strike our country under Robert Bork. Now, Biden didn't call this Amy Barrett's America. He was basically saying that one more conservative vote would provide all of these things. But yeah, the Obamacare point is oversold. It's not surprising the Democrats are running on this, because I think that helped them in the 2018 midterm elections. But this case that the Supreme Court is hearing this fall for a decision probably next June isn't a replay or a redo of NFIB versus Sebelius, the Obamacare case where 8 years ago John Roberts reconsidered the individual mandate as a tax and therefore upheld it under the taxing power. Because in the interim, Congress has zeroed out that tax penalty, whatever you have to pay for not having insurance, and didn't mess with the rest of the law. And so the principal question that the court's going to be looking at now is what lawyers called severability. That is, even if the mandate can no longer be justified under the taxing power, how much of the rest of the law has to fall? And since Congress decided, we have evidence that even without the mandate or without the enforcement mechanism, they didn't want to get rid of the rest of the law. That's a pretty good indication with current severability doctrine that, again, very little chance that the law will fall with or without Judge Barrett's vote.
Now, whether it's Obamacare or other cases, this just goes to the point that we were talking about earlier, Ilya Shapiro, about the role of the judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, and how it has vastly expanded in terms of its influence, where a lot of times the Congress will punt an issue, in effect, to the Supreme Court, hoping that it will come their way, that the court will uphold it or overturn it however they want, and then it may not happen. As, for example, Republicans seem to have learned with the Supreme Court in the past, and then it fell upon the Congress to repeal and replace Obamacare, and they were unsuccessful in that purely political endeavor.
Yeah, no, that's right. Obamacare itself, recall, was passed only because there were some shenanigans in prosecuting senior senator from Alaska, Ted Stevens. The Democrat narrowly won there. A couple of other things happened. Anyway, the Democrats briefly had 60 seats in the Senate, and so were able to overcome the filibuster to enact Obamacare, after which Ted Kennedy died, and his replacement was a Republican in Massachusetts because of the opposition to Obamacare in Massachusetts. So exceedingly difficult to have these very progressive goals enacted politically, and that's why their focus is on the courts.
Two final questions for you, Ilya Shapiro, again, author of the brand new book, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations, and the Politics of America's Highest Court. Be sure to check it out. I want to play cut 8. This is Senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, where he was talking a little bit about this possibility, and I think there's a huge possibility at this point, that the Supreme Court could take up one or more election-related cases. And if Judge Amy Coney Barrett does become, as I would expect, Justice Amy Coney Barrett. He has a certain thing he would like to see her do. Let's take a listen.
Senator, do you plan to meet with Judge Barrett?
It's my intention to do so. I think you know my spirit, which is to sit down and meet with people and talk to them. And I'm going to make it very clear. One of the things I want to ask her is, will she recuse herself? Because if she does not, in terms of any election issues that come before us, because if she does not recuse herself, I fear that the court will be further delegitimized. In other words, President Trump has said, I will not accept the result of the election unless I win. I'm going to push it to the Supreme Court. And oh, by the way, during the election, I'm going to put somebody on the court as well. So I hope to have a conversation with her. And I'm blessed to be on the Judiciary Committee, and I'll have that as well. And hopefully have a good informed dialogue back and forth. But my larger hope is that...
So Senator Booker, a.k.a. Senator Spartacus, would like a Justice Barrett to recuse herself if an election-related case were to come up, because why? I don't quite understand it.
Because her nomination, or the fact that a nomination is being made, is an election issue. I don't know. It's not real grounds. I mean, this is again a political positioning by, maybe he'll have another Spartacus moment at the hearings.
Yeah, to help delegitimize the court even further by setting the table for, saying, hey, Justice Barrett's on the bench and therefore this is all illegitimate. And that I'm always frustrated when I hear that kind of talk from a United States Senator. And one thing I want to get to, wrapping up with Ilya Shapiro, that I know is just central point, and we talked about it earlier, the start of the interview, but I think it's worth underscoring, which is that as we're seeing the politics play out in this nomination confirmation process, we need to keep in mind as Americans that while things may be more heated in certain respects, you may be seeing it more play out in front of you because of the 24/7 news cycle and social media. This really is nothing new. We have seen the increasing politicization of the courts, and even going back to, as you pointed out, George Washington, the court has been involved in political scuffles quite a bit.
Or between the pre-Civil War period, between Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, as kind of the parties were shuffling and there were issues on the frontier and questions of how powerful the government should be, only 8 of 22 Supreme Court nominees were confirmed. So we've certainly had periods of maximal tension. But you're right, the 24-hour news cycle and social media, while not creating the controversy, do make it more immediate and more accessible to the average citizen.
Ilya Shapiro, author of, let's put it on the screen one more time, Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations, and the Politics of America's Highest Court. Thanks so much for joining us today, and best of luck with the book. You've got some great insights in there.
My pleasure, Jimmy. And I should say, if your listeners, if your watchers go to supremedisorder.com, not only can they buy the book, but they can download for free a statistical historical appendix about all these different nominations.
Oh, that's fantastic. A great way to kind of put it right in front of you very easily, especially as people are just intrigued at this point with the history of the court in a way that I think pops up only from time to time, and now is one of those times. Best of luck with the book, my friend, and take care.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. Once again, Ilya Shapiro of the Cato Institute and author of Supreme Disorder, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And I just want to say, as we wrap up the show today, that this nomination process really is central in so many ways to the way in which politics will evolve in the coming years and the way in which the court will operate. And I hope that Ilya Shapiro is right, that we get a more principled court that will be focused on restraining government and not allowing it to just simply grow, and also maybe be a little less involved in the political process, because perhaps there will be some more cause for discussion among the two parties, that they will hash out issues and not just look to the courts to sort it out. Very important that we keep that in mind moving forward. Well, that is it for us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Once again, my thanks to Ilya Shapiro, our guest today, to Nathan Matoush, our producer here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, also to the Washington Examiner, our esteemed partners, and of course to you for watching, subscribing, all those good things, and sharing the content. Please do share our videos, promote it out there, spread the word. We appreciate it. That is it for us today. Coming up Thursday, Dinesh D'Souza. Friday, Judge Jeanine Pirro. Do not miss it. We'll be back. Have a great day. And of course, may God bless America.